Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through a list of some of my favorite books that I've picked up this year. I do have a few things to go over before jumping into the favorites. One, I will have a separate video focused solely on my favorite new fantasy releases, which does mean that the books discussed here are going to just be backlist fantasy books. Also, I had mentioned in a DNF's conversation style video that I didn't do a favorites of the year at the end of the second quarter, which I do typically like to do both for backlist works and for new fantasy releases, and the reason I skipped doing it for the second quarter was just purely because I was finding a lot of what I was picking up just wasn't really standing out to me, not objectively, not from a place of I just think the quality of fantasy has gone down or anything like that. It was just that I wasn't finding that I was really falling in love with a lot of the works that I was picking up, and I didn't want to put out one of these videos just to say, I kind of liked these. I really want to ensure that when I do these videos, they genuinely are coming from a place of, yeah, I really liked these, and I think there's a good chance a lot of you will like them as well. That said, I have gone over almost every single one of the books that I'm going to talk about more in depth in separate videos. So this is going to be kind of a nice bookend to the both second and third quarter of the year, and it will just sort of be overview style. If you do want to see more in-depth thoughts, I will have videos where I have gone more in-depth in the description bar down below. The last thing I'll mention is that some of my favorite things this year have not been books. I do want to start with those, as they're going to be kind of like honorable mentions, although some of these I feel deserve to be placed just as high, if not higher, than some of the things I'm going to mention as favorites. Because they're not technically books, I know that that means that they're not going to interest some of you, so I'll have a timestamp. You can skip ahead if you don't care about these other additional things, but I did want to just take a sec to mention them because I really have fallen head over heels for a lot of these things. So I'm going to start with those. The first thing I'll mention, actually, interestingly, the first 4 things I'm going to mention are all things that start with an A. So apparently the key to my heart is to title your work with an A. I have rewatched Arcane. Still holds up. Oh my gosh, is it so good? Is there any question that it would hold up? I feel like not. But if you are interested in seeing more Arcane content, I have videos about Arcane over on my side channel, Full Meta Analysis. That's where I talk about anime and manga and video games and storytelling and all its other forms besides books. So if you aren't subscribed over there and you're interested in hearing more, I'll have that channel linked. But that is where I'm doing more in-depth Arcane content. I just love Arcane. All the reasons I love it just intensifies upon rewatch. I feel like upon rewatch, I'm just more of like, oh my gosh, everything is perfect and brilliant. And if you don't know the setup for Arcane, it's hard to talk about without spoiling anything, but essentially you are following 2 sisters among a large cast of characters who are living in an undercity that is oppressed, and a lot of their problems stem from the council's decisions within Piltover, or the Topsiders. That's all I'll say for now. The setting is fantastic, the animation is fantastic, the mental health representation is next to none. It's really, everything about this is fantastic, but truly, if you're looking for more in-depth thoughts, I spent so much time just talking about the first 3 episodes. I talked for over an hour, and I was like, geez, I have to spend so much time editing this because I just love it so much, and I think everything about it is brilliant. So if you are interested in more Arcane content, come join me in gushing about it because I think it's great. Also, for the first time ever this year, I did watch Avatar: The Last Airbender. I had never seen it. I knew next to nothing except for that it was somewhat elemental based. I truly don't know how I managed to escape hearing things about Atla, but I did. And I'm so glad I did, because that meant I got to go into it with fresh eyes, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it is absolutely incredible what it manages to capture in a quote-unquote kids show is actually an incredible feat. Not because I think kids shows are somehow less than or anything like that, but I have discussed before that with the depth, not just of how significant the themes are, but just how much we really dig into them, I think that is a difficult thing to accomplish when you cannot cross certain lines into really showcasing how brutal war can be, how brutal colonization and colonialism can be, when you can't really show the darkest sides of something from a place that you typically find in more adult-centered content, I think it makes it very difficult because it limits what you can use to showcase how devastating those things are. But that show, I think, manages to really capture how devastating and tragic the consequences of those things are. It does it phenomenally. I'm sure all of you know, because unlike me, most of you, I think, have seen Avatar: The Last Airbender and you're not new to it, but it was great. It was great. I loved it. Did a whole series on it. It's funny because it has now changed the structure of how I go about reviewing things basically over on my side channel, because I initially just kind of watched the first few episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender and did a first impressions, but I was like, I mean, I obviously want to keep watching and I would like to discuss more of this. And so then I started doing batch reviews for a section at a time. With that show in particular, I would do 5 episodes at a time. So I really went through it, and then from there, I was like, I think this is how I want to go about reviewing a lot of the shows that I get into, which is what I did with Attack on Titan. And Attack on Titan is one of my new favorite things ever. I love it so much. I mean, Arcane has been a favorite, so I feel like mentioning it here is kind of, I don't know, it feels like cheating. But anyway, because I've seen it before. But Attack on Titan. New to Attack on Titan. Knew basically nothing going into it. I'd been saying pretty much all year long that I was going to check out Attack on Titan. And then after watching Avatar: The Last Airbender, I decided, okay, this is how I'm going to go into Attack on Titan. Which I'm glad I did, but simultaneously I'm upset that I did. Because there were so many times where I would have a certain amount of episodes to watch. And then I'd be like, no! Because of where things would leave off. This is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. I will say I was kind of on the fence for a while with that show. I definitely felt it had the potential to hit some really high highs, but I just didn't know the full extent of those highs when I first got into it. And also, when I first started, as I said, I thought they had the potential. I just didn't know if it would actually meet those things. And not only met them, it has exceeded them. I think Attack on Titan is so good. I think it's so good. I can see why people maybe have certain thoughts later on, but to me, I actually feel that it made it that much more meaningful. I think it's so good. It starts out, as far as the premise go, for any of you that don't know anything about Attack on Titan, it kind of just seems like giant monsters eat people, and that's that. But that's definitely not all it is. Not even a little bit. Although that's how it comes across at first. So please check it out. It's so good. And then the last for the 4 A's that are kind of honorable mentions because they're not books would be Apothecary Diaries. I thought Apothecary Diaries was so charming and so funny, and also has a lot of political maneuverings and scheming within it. And you see the story primarily through one of the most likable main characters, but they're also very different from a lot of the main perspectives that we get in stories. I love the main character in this. The setup is that Mao Mao is her name. She is sold into servitude, and she is now a servant within this palace, but she has a background with certain kinds of poisons, and she worked for an apothecary, a person that was very knowledgeable about all these things. I don't want to say too much about her connection with that person, as I feel like discovery is a big part of what makes this show a lot of fun. But regardless, she has a lot of knowledge, and given how much scheming occurs within the palace, there is a lot of attempts at murdering people, especially using poison, and given her interest and her expertise, it is quickly noted that she is watching what's going on around her with a very keen eye, and people are wondering, I think you might have more knowledge than a typical servant, and they kind of bring her in, and this not only now forces her to be a part of a lot of the scheming in a way, or at the very least she's not just observing things from the sidelines, but it also provides her an opportunity to explore her one true passion, which is basically poisons. She's the best. I really don't feel I can hype her up enough. You just gotta check out Apothecary Diaries for yourself. I, being not typically that person that's a snob about sub over dub, but I'm going to be that person right now. I do think that both for Attack on Titan and Apothecary Diaries, I was a bigger fan of the sub. I tried the dub initially, but I found that the sub just won out. I feel like it captures the characters better in both of these instances. But anyway, those 4. I feel I probably could have just done a whole video on them, but I did not. They're just included at the start of this one. They're great. Love them. Have talked about every single one of these over on FMA, so if you are interested in checking out more of my thoughts on those, I will have those videos linked. But anyway, now jumping into an honorable mention for a book and then getting into the official favorites of the last 2 quarters. We have, for my honorable mention, Spark of the Everflame. I'm really hopeful that I'm going to continue enjoying the rest of this series. I don't know what's in store for me. I'm a little nervous based off of a certain detail at the end. I almost am worried there's going to be a trope that I don't really like that ends up playing a part in the rest of the series. But the first book had so much of what I want more of in fantasy. First off, it has a more unique setting. Second, and this is tied to the synopsis, so I'll just say really quick. The main character is a young woman named Diem, whose mother goes missing at the beginning of the story, and then from that point on, she is trying to figure out what happened to her mother. In doing so, she discovers a little bit more about the inner workings of their society. That's all I'll say for now, because I don't want to ruin too much. But part of why I'm tying this to the things that I feel we don't get as much of in fantasy is that our main character, and having her mother go missing, her role within her family unit does shift. Her role within her profession shifts. So she was following in her mother's footsteps as a healer, and then she is finding she now has to even further follow in her mother's footsteps to ensure that her brother still has the privileges that her mother was working towards. So she's kind of trying to take her mom's place in that sense. She doesn't just get to be the big sister to her little brother anymore. She now has to kind of balance out the responsibilities of getting older. She has a father figure that she cares very much about. She has a mentor she cares very much about. And so I just really appreciated getting to see a lot more of the connections with other characters besides just a romantic connection, which I feel is the popular thing to do right now, is to explore the romance side of things, which I'm not opposed to. I'm glad that we're getting well fleshed out romances, but I do miss, or at the very least, I want more of the other kinds of relationships and stories. And so I feel that Spark of the Everflame did that. The only reason it's an honorable mention and not a favorite is because I just am waiting to see where the series goes, because I wouldn't say I was the most emotionally connected to the story overall. But I could see myself caring more and more and more, and there's like little glimpses of things that I think are going to result in potentially really interesting moral conundrums for our character, and also the question of what exactly do we do when we want change, and the different perspectives on that you'll get throughout the story. I think that's the direction we're going to go in. But the first book is rather introductory, which I didn't mind whatsoever. I felt it was a great way to start this story. I just hope I continue to enjoy it. For the official favorites, I am so happy to say that I decided to do a reread of something, in part because, and primarily actually because of my patrons. This was a patron pick, and if you are interested in seeing an in-depth discussion, I do have one for this book over on my Patreon, so my Patreon will be linked, but that book would be City of Brass. I read City of Brass years ago when it first came out, and by the end of it, I was really invested. And then as soon as the second book came out, I got it, I went to read it, and then there was a time skip. And for whatever reason, that just totally took me aback. I think in part because, one, I had no idea there was going to be a time skip, but the first book leaves off kind of with a cliffhanger. So going from a cliffhanger, a pretty intense one, to a time skip, I was like, what? And I just feel like I couldn't get over that. And for the longest time, I have wanted to reread because there wasn't anything that I tremendously disliked about it or anything like that. I liked the first book. I was excited about the second book. I just needed to get over the fact that I wasn't going to get that in-between time within the time skip. So anyway, I finally got around to rereading it thanks to my patrons picking this as a buddy read. And I loved it. I loved the world building. I loved the characterization. I loved the fact that the setting is so different from what we see so often. I think that it blends a lot of mythology with a lot of history, and I think it does that really seamlessly while still maintaining its own unique flair. And then from there, I picked up the sequel, Kingdom of Copper, and I also loved that. So I can't wait. At the time I'm recording this, I have yet to read the third book, but I plan to read it very soon, and I'm so excited because it's just isn't that such a great feeling when you pick up a series and it's already done and you enjoy the first couple of installments? I just love it. I'm hopeful that it will be among my new favorite series in general. I don't know that I'll love it as much as Age of Madness. Age of Madness, many of you know, kind of cursed me for a lot of this year when it comes to finding new favorites, and I think this might have played a role in why I had a hard time finding anything I really loved in the second quarter. As far as books go, obviously, I already talked about a bunch of stuff I loved that weren't books, but because I loved Age of Madness so much, I was like, nothing compares, and I was being a big baby. But I'm sure a lot of you understand that feeling. So anyway, I don't know that it's going to be quite that level, because the level of like cynicism and bleakness and the funny factor that is Age of Madness, it just is, it appeals to so much of what I like, and nothing is like that. But City of Brass and this trilogy in general is very, very different. So I don't know why I'm bringing up. I guess I just can't help but be like, oh, I love Age of Madness. That was the first quarter. We're focusing on quarters 2 and 3, and specifically this series thus far. One of my favorites of the year, and I can't wait to read the third one. I hope I like it. After that, we have Race the Sands. I did do a whole dedicated video to a couple of this author's works just because I felt that this author is relatively underhyped, and also the works by this author are very different from one another. So in the past, I'd read the Queens of Renthia trilogy, and then Race the Sands is a standalone. So because not only the length of the story, but the plots themselves and the settings, because those are so different, but also I feel both are underhyped, I coupled them together in a video, and then I checked out her newest work, The Spell Shop, which is drastically different once again from her previous works. And now I'm finding that I think The Spell Shop is getting a lot of buzz and a lot of people are really liking it, but I really wanted to showcase within that review what Race the Sands and the Queens of Renthia trilogy have to offer, as maybe there's a chance you'll pick up one of the books by this author and not really love it, but there's a chance that you would still like the others because she's always so different from book to book. The pleasant thing for me here is that I have enjoyed everything I've picked up by this author, and that includes Race the Sands, which is the one that is officially on this list of favorites. I thought based off the synopsis that I wasn't really going to be into it because it's kind of like a racing story with like a coach dynamic, like a mentor-mentee, but the mentor is like a coach. I, for whatever reason, just didn't know that I was going to love that within a fantasy world. And I didn't know that it would really reach a level of stakes that I cared about, but the stakes get way bigger than you would ever anticipate. And I really feel the author utilized a standalone for this story fantastically. It just kept building and building and getting more and more interesting as we went, and the characters became more fleshed out and fun to follow. I had the best time with this one. Next up, actually the last three are all self-pub works, which is so exciting, as is the case for pretty much everything on today's list. I have done more in-depth videos for these and mentioned them across various different other videos, but I'm going to go through them relatively quickly. So we have Rise of the Ranger, we have Ascendant, and we have Reign and Ruin, all quite different from each other. I will say Rise of the Ranger and Ascendant feel more like some of the classic fantasy. Rise of the Ranger to the extreme. I mean, I feel like Rise of the Ranger takes so many of our familiar character archetypes and fantasy races, and also the things that go along with those, like what you think of when you think of a dwarf, when you think of an elf, whatever those are, the story pretty much has it, but it takes those familiar things and it's building on them in a way that is both epic and it's doing its own unique story within a familiar framework, and I have had such a good time with it. I've only read the first two in the series, but I have all the rest of them, and I can't wait to continue on because I just feel like the second book, it introduced new characters. One new character in particular I really liked, and I'm excited to just have this long fantasy series to sink my teeth into. I just need the time because there's so many in the series, and I can't wait to dive into more. But I was saying how this is very familiar to a lot of what we've seen in the past with fantasy. I think Ascendant, that is true as well, as it is very much building off of the A Boy and His Dragon setup. but I do feel like it really does that setup well. And then also similar to Rise of the Ranger, I have read the second book in this series, and I have greatly enjoyed the expansion of what you get within the first. So I'm really excited to continue on with both of these series. And then Reign and Ruin, which is the last one for today, is actually formally considered a fantasy romance. I have said basically every time I bring it up that I think it is the fantasy romance for the fantasy reader. Not to say there's anything wrong with fantasy romance that's more centered on and trying to have a story that romance readers really, really love, but I just find, as somebody who loves fantasy, when I pick up fantasy romance, I want more of a balance of the two genres, and I felt this one did that genre combination perfectly. The fantasy elements, when it comes to the politics, were great. When it comes to the magic, were great. The characterization, the scheming, all of those things were fantastic. And then coupled with that, no pun intended, was a great couple. A couple I really rooted for. I really wanted them to be together. I felt like their attraction felt realistic. I felt like the way in which they had to deal with what's going on in their own lives and the stakes being incredibly high, they had to deal with all of that. And then, as is the case with a lot of humans, through all the things going on in life, sometimes you're attracted to somebody, and sometimes you're trying to find a way to fit somebody that you care about into your life, and you're trying to find a way to work together toward common goals. And I just felt like all of it was balanced so incredibly well. So if you are that person that you are interested in checking out fantasy romance, and you find that maybe a lot of the popular ones just aren't really quite hitting the mark for you, I think there's a good chance that this one will. As I said multiple times, I have gone far more in depth about all of these in other videos, so I'll have those linked. If you're interested in checking any of these out for yourself, I'll have links to the books themselves in the description bar down below. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.